Good luck. Okay, welcome to our department seminar. Today it's a great pleasure to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Melissa Breeden. As many of you know, Melissa earned her PhD here in April. Many of you may forget it was about 9 days before our major snowstorm in April. I did not forget that. That was so awesome. It was a cold day though. I had notes about it. Remember we went downtown afterwards? It was cold. It was just downright cold. I just thought it wasn't April. But anyway, it was a great day. And I've known Melissa for just over 6 years. First met her in the fall of 2012 when she took 452. And from me, and it's been a really fine 6 years since. I mean, this is a person with indomitable determination. She started working in my research group in the next fall in 2013, and upon earning her doctorate, she's been working as a PhD, postdoctoral research associate with Brett Hoover, I think, right, in Space Science and Engineering Center. But in collaboration with Michael, Dan Vimont, Stephanie, Matt Newman, Dodger fan, trying to build a LIM model. What the heck does it stand for? Linear inverse model. I have it written down here. I'm trying not to read it. Linear inverse model to do a whole bunch of different problems. One of them will be blocking and jet retraction. Melissa's had research experience in all kinds of things around campus. I said this at her PhD defense. She's got one of these really enviable records. It's very varied. She worked in the symmetric torus lab here at the university. She had contact with physical oceanography, both as an REU at Oregon State and then with Galen as an undergrad, where they ended up doing work that resulted in a jointly authored manuscript in biogeoscience. So Melissa's had a lot of exposure to a lot of different things. She also has an abiding interest in the interface between public policy and science, and so is currently looking again for jobs, well, not jobs, what do you call them? Actually internships or?
Postdocs?
No, the things at AGU and AMS, they have a name.
Yeah,
fellowships, yeah. Science fellowships from AMS, AGU, other organizations like that to work somewhere in the Congress for a year or so. But she's also applying for academic positions and having encouraging degrees of success in both. And that's really exciting. Melissa's just a fantastic colleague to have worked with, and today she's going to tell us about some recent experiences that she's had in the Earth Science Women's Network Leadership Workshop, which I'm really looking forward to hearing about. And if you haven't picked up some Post-it notes, you need on the order of 5 to be able to get through this presentation and participate in a meaningful way. So, Melissa, take it away.
Cool. Thanks for that introduction, John. Thanks everyone for coming. So yeah, this was a 2.5-day-ish workshop held in Boulder, and it was motivated by kind of a need that the Earth Science Women's Network tries to fulfill in terms of having resources for becoming leaders, not just scientists, but kind of taking that next step to being better communicators, better people to work with broadly. So I thought that would be a nice topic for seminar. And this is just a picture of that I took when I was in Boulder. It is very nice to be there, although it did end up snow raining a couple days after this, so fun. So just a little bit about the Earth Science Women's Network. If you're not familiar with it, it was founded at AGU in 2002. One of the founders is Tracy Holloway, one of our professors, and it started as a small email list that kind of grew and grew as the need for such a network became more and more apparent with time. So now it has thousands of members representing a vast amount of countries. And if you're also familiar with the Earth Science job email list, I get their emails all the time, that kind of grew out of the Earth Science Women's Network and now is just a broader Earth Science jobs email list. So great way to know about internships ranging from undergrad to postdoc and professor and thereafter type opportunities. So they really came up with this workshop. I think they had one in 2013, not sure if they've had any since. And they were sponsored as well by a bunch of these institutions that are all have some basis in Boulder. The Boulder hub is really incredible for our field. So just to get things going right off the bat here, we're thinking about leadership, and I signed up for this workshop not really having thought about what I had signed up for that much, except that it sounded interesting. So I would like us all to just take a minute or two and think of a few successful and unsuccessful leaders, in academia or not, and think about what characteristics really made them either successful or unsuccessful. So if you have scratch paper, you can scratch down a few ideas or use extra Post-its. So let's just all take a minute and think about both successful versus unsuccessful leaders, and what characteristics make them one category or the other. Okay, and so now maybe we've got our memories jogged a little bit. What I'm going to have us do, I think I'm doing this right, great reveal here. What I would like us to do now is we have two pie charts here, one here up at the top of the whatever this is of the room, the front of the room, and then there's one over there on the side. And so I'm going to split us down this, trying to make it even. Have most of this room, half of the room, write down on your Post-its what makes the characteristics you thought of that make unsuccessful leaders, please. And then when you have those, you can put them in that pie chart and kind of categorize it out of those three things, general expertise, technical skills, or emotional intelligence, or more interpersonal skills. And then this half of the room, please do the same thing, writing down your key characteristics of good leaders, and then come and place them up on this board here. And hopefully we will see the results that I'm trying to get. Otherwise, well, this is a very interesting group.
One Post-it note per characteristic?
Yeah. And so you can write down 3 or 4 characteristics. What we want to see here is just a distribution among these 3 general characteristics of what a good leader makes.
You actually write them on the board?
Write them on your Post-it and then stick your Post-it in the right category.
Oh.
Does that make sense? Yeah, and if you miss Post-its, we've got plenty of pens up here. And And since we're a smaller group, you can definitely write more than 3 if you want. Things are just coming up. I've got, so again, kind of poor leader, that half of the room, good leader, this half of the room, which I will kick us, and this side. So where mine go? And everyone can put like all 3 or 5 or whatever of their Post-its in either category. We're trying to get a good distribution of kind of similar thoughts here.
Watch out.
Yeah, jeez. Blinded you.
So we can begin to see some trends emerging with the distribution of where everyone put their Post-its, which is what I was hoping for. Spoiler alert, leading the witness. Loving right on the cross there. Just
Yeah.
can't make up, it's excellent. I did the exact same thing with mine the first time around. Okay, so it looks like most are ready or finishing up. So what we're seeing here, right, is that the kind of general expertise or skills that we spend so much time being trained on don't really correspond to what makes a good leader or not. And it's this other category of emotional intelligence. Just get up and read some of these. So charismatic, social awareness. These are the good leaders. Encouraging. Team members' success comes before leaders' success. Approachable, pragmatic, inspire. All things that, there's no class on being inspired that we take. And I'm just curious, so what the kind of same kind of emotional intelligent categories over here are. Need, yes. Unable to see alternate ways of doing things. Failure to take advice or counsel. Cool. Dismissive, poor listener. Combative. Oh, really competitive, not enthusiastic. Yeah, so all these are clustered, and then some of these definitely being unorganized, ignorant. Yeah, that's definitely a problem. So there's some things that might fall here, but most of these are skills or that are characteristics that fall in emotional intelligence. So great, thank you for participating. That's all I'm going to make you guys do. But it was to set up kind of the idea of what we explored in the workshop. For the majority of the time, which I didn't know what to expect, but I wasn't expecting what we got, which is a good thing. And so a lot of the workshop was based on understanding ourselves as people and our personality traits, and then understanding how we relate with others. Right, so that says it all. And so the way we did this, has anyone here heard of the DISC profile before? Okay, Zoe has it. So it's kind of like the Myers-Briggs categories of personalities, but it's a little simpler. So there are 4 main kind of personality traits. We took an online survey before the seminar, and then we had our profiles kind of revealed to us where we were placed within this spectrum of how people are. And some general ways you can think about these being divided. First of all, I'll just go through them. So the D category stands for dominance. These types of people are task-oriented. They're also fast-paced, so their main motivation is getting results. And sometimes the words forceful or strong-willed can be purveyed negatively sometimes, but I don't think that's very fair. Anyways, that's kind of what would lead you to be in the dominant category. Also fast-paced, but people-oriented is the influencer group. These people are, very social, high-spirited, enthusiastic, and are really more characterized by like what the who is. So dominant people are interested with the what. Influencers are interested with the who. And then moving to these 2 other categories, the C category, conscientiousness, is really characterized by being accurate, being precise. And they are also task-oriented like the dominant group, but they are a little bit more slower paced. They don't need results this exact moment. If it's not the right result, they don't care. They're very methodical. They will take that time to get the correct answer. So a lot of scientists, we got clustered kind of in this room we were in, and a lot of scientists end up falling in the conscientious category, which makes sense because of the nature of our field. And then finally, we have the steady group, who are also people-oriented like influencers are, but they are also, they're more steady, they're more evenly paced versus influencers who are like all over the place sometimes. And so they are really focused on providing support to a group. They are the people who kind of sit back and observe more than anyone else. And so that's just that's the 4th category. They're interested in kind of how things are happening and how they can be supportive and thoughtful. So we all, we didn't know this before we took the survey, but we ended up having our profiles revealed, and I checked with the person who was running this part of the workshop, and this test is proprietary, but she said I could share all my results. So you end up getting kind of a dot that represents where you are in this circle. Anyone who knows me, I'm sure, is shocked to know that I'm in the enthusiastic eye category, and pretty dead center. So there are different kind of gradations where maybe your I with a little bit of the D category or the S category. I was just center I, as they call it. And so they give you this whole report, 20 pages, it's blurry here, but they give you kind of what priorities kind of have to do with how I get excited about work. So being enthusiastic is definitely one, and also taking action, being fast-paced in things is another characteristic of mine. And there's an emphasis here that none of these categories are better than any other one. Everyone's personality and motivations are different, and they're all equally valid. So there's this whole kind of interesting workbook, and everyone in the group we were surveyed after, and everyone felt like their categories and all of the details that they learned about themselves were like freakishly dead on, and kind of spooky. But it's not so obvious where it's not useful. It just aligns well with kind of how people perceive themselves, and then was a good basis for learning how I would interact with somebody else. Someone in the I category needs to work on slowing down, not monopolizing the conversation. Otherwise, we're going to intimidate people who are a little quieter, maybe in the S or the C category. People in the S or C category have different things they need to work on to work with people in other groups. So it was all about learning how your own kind of self, how you are as a person, and how you can kind of interact with people more effectively to not scare them. Because one of mine said, let silence happen, which is that's like something I do not like. And I realized, so there was a lot in there that really reminded us of our experience. And so this was the first day, and so this is just another set of things that I think you can get on their website. This is generic, some of it's personal, but some of this information is generic. And there are kind of ways you can think of dominant and influencers having similar characteristics. And so there's all these things like priorities, what motivates people, what fears do people in different groups have. Just a lot of information about, thinking about others, which was a good way to set the workshop off. So that was kind of our Sunday afternoon. And then Monday we came in and started thinking about how do we apply this to actual leadership. And leaders are kind of generally known for being, confident or courageous. And so we had a discussion about how we, and feel free to have comments or interject or anything as we move on here. I like discussions. But we started out with kind of how do we cultivate or engender more confidence or more courage in ourselves. And the way that Chris, who was our facilitator for all of this, put it was by developing a tolerance for discomfort. So putting yourself in situations, I get nervous before every single talk I get. I just know it's going to happen. But having the sense of I'm freaking out, but here we go, instead of running away, is kind of what makes leaders something that distinguishes them from kind of non-leaders. And so experience and also just being aware of when you're nervous, but not letting it stop you from doing things was really important. And this reminded me of a quote from Game of Thrones. This man's son asked him, can a man be brave when he's afraid? And Ned Stark says, that's the only time a man can be brave, or woman. And I think that's very true, right? It's when you're putting yourself out of your comfort zone that, that really exciting things can happen, that you can grow. So even though, he's arguably one of the least savvy characters on the show, but he had some really good insight while he was still there. So does that kind of make sense, or does anyone have thoughts or comments on that? Seem to jive a little bit? Cool. Then we also dove into more interpersonal relationships. We first understand ourselves, where we're coming from, and then we moved forward with how can we understand and unpack how we react to things when we're interacting with others. And so this really ended up going into some sort of neural considerations here, and just thinking about how our brains work for or against us. And so I'm going to introduce to you just two terms. The neocortex is the part of the brain that controls logic, decision making, kind of where you are on a normal basis, making logical decisions that are motivated by things that make sense to others. And then there's also this amygdala, which responds 100 times as quickly as our neocortex and is more an instinct-based emotional response mechanism. And so a lot of interactions can go awry when something triggers your amygdala, fires it up, and leads to something really bad happening. So if your amygdala gets triggered by, let's say, someone's being mean to you, bad leader over there being mean to you, not listening to you, making a judgment about you or something, that's going to end up triggering, and you can tell when this is happening, right? I start shaking or sweating, or you get super emotional because your amygdala has hijacked your neocortex from thinking. And so cortisol is released. That is the arbiter. Someone called it stress juice in our talk, which I thought was perfect. But basically, a bunch of cortisol gets released into the brain and inhibits the neocortex from making intelligent decisions. And the cortisol, I learned, will stay in your system if you don't do anything for 18 minutes. So you have this long period of time that you sort of have to get around to get back to having a logical response to something versus having this freak out moment of attacking or running away, or this this kind of instinctual thing that we have to deal with, just thanks to nature. Yeah.
Is that why at 10 or so minutes after a test, you suddenly come up with the correct answer?
Yeah. Yeah, it's all that, yeah.
That's interesting.
It's wonderful, yes.
How do you get rid of the stress juice?
Yeah, we have some things that we'll talk about, but one thing is breathing. Just taking deep breaths actually lowers them. And in interactions, if you're talking with someone and you kind of feel like they're getting triggered, asking them questions, not really difficult ones, but just oh, what makes you think that way? Or asking them simple questions is a way to kind of activate the neocortex and get some of that cortisol out of there. For me, I was freaking out today for a different reason, but I just went on a walk and that seemed to calm down. That's another thing. But all those things, people take a deep breath when you get mad or something. There's actual reasons for why that is. And so the reason we're talking about this is that when you're interacting with people at work or at home, everyone starts actions or a conversation with some sort of intention. And that intention is usually well meant, unless you're a sociopath or something, but your emotions can clog what actually gets driven into your behaviors and then the impact you have. So you kind of have an intention of what you're trying to do, but you're emotional this whole time, which can kind of change your behavior, and your behavior, if it's not well-tuned, will then mess up the impact that you're trying to have. And this was another quote of Chris's, that because people during this whole thing, none of us work together. It's kind of different doing it here where we all might work together. But people were being very honest about specific interactions they were having with their bosses or supervisors, and kind of being defensive. And so this quote of people don't things to you, people do things for themselves. When you're interacting with people, they're thinking about their own needs that need to be met, and so it's kind of a blanket statement of try not to take things super personally, right? Or I get into paranoid thinking of, oh, why did they say that? They said it to make me nervous, or they said it to put me down. And that's just kind of trying to flip that thinking a little bit was more constructive in how to build better relationships. And another thing, we're talking about emotions here, and every emotion I think can be fueled to kind of help you or be productive in some way, except for shame. So this was another thing that Chris pointed out that's just interesting to meditate on. If you're mad because someone says something, you shouldn't maybe discount that as much. You should figure out why it makes you mad and let your amygdala calm down before responding if you can. But shame seems to be the only emotion that really has no use, so you should just not worry about it.
Really? That's surprising that that's the result of some, long decades of scholarly work. I think right now we're suffering from a lack of shame in our society, and I think you could make an argument for that.
Yeah.
And so it's not useless. I think it does some role. Maybe it has no chemical signature, but I can't believe that people think it's useless. I find that hard to believe.
Yeah, and this is all Alex. This is all Chris's take.
Yeah,
Or
yeah.
Alex for some reason, because that's a good point. I'm trying to think if there's another emotion you could reframe. Kind of that. Oh, we're being terrible as a country or something, like
Yeah, yeah.
sadness or anger.
Guilt or something. About guilt.
Guilt. Yeah, guilt and shame. I don't, do we call those the same or not?
Yeah, I don't know. That's a reasonable question.
Yeah.
Maybe that's where it goes, I guess.
Yeah, because this was kind of building off of there being 4 core emotions: joy, sadness, anger, and one other bad one. There's only one happy one, and that's joy, which is a bummer because, but it was kind of built off of those 4 pillars. I can't remember what the 4th one was, but yeah, that is a good point because sometimes maybe we should feel a little, but I don't know if sad or shame do the same.
Yeah, okay, that's fair.
And it might be, this might have been geared towards a woman-only audience, since kind of in general we're kind of more likely to beat ourselves up, it seems, as a bigger population. But really most of this applies to everybody. So that's just me thinking out loud. Okay, so some reactions, way to tell when your amygdala is triggered. We're kind of thinking about negative ones here. We've kind of talked about these already, but everyone has different kind of maybe bullet points here that they identify with. And that might go back to this kind of instinctual reaction that we have to deal with our amygdala, which is a fight or flight response. So for me, I usually either attack or get defensive. Some people might shut down more or like run away or things like that. So I mean, not everyone experiences all of these, but there are ways to, maybe unpack when you're talking with someone who maybe isn't facially emotive, but is kind of invoking one of these because they feel insecure and you made them freak out on accident. So that's just a little bit of, self introspection here. And so then the way you can kind of get around this, if somebody is, if someone has triggered you or you see that you triggered somebody else, is to start thinking of interactions as kind of balancing your own emotional needs and what motivates you to do well or not, but to do well versus what the other person's emotional needs might be. So what we did as an exercise, if you want to try this later, is pick a couple of people that you kind of feel like trigger you, and then write down, what makes you feel triggered. Like, are you being, for me, I really value autonomy and relating to people. So those are my needs. The people who trigger me usually have needs that are more in the status or mostly the status category here. So this is just a way, and all of these are valid, although I think and this was such a great part of the workshop, was that it kind of normalized all motivations and sort of things that sometimes have negative social connotations. Like everyone in the D category, the dominant category, they're being called forceful or strong-willed. They all looked very sheepish after they were called that. And I think that's a social thing. That's not actually a bad characteristic to have. It's just this social context that we might value some of these more than others was kind of erased during this workshop. And everybody's needs were validated. And it was personal. We didn't have to tell people, but it was just really motivated. It was just nice to have some of the intentions or motivations I have feel justified instead of like, no, you shouldn't. I like recognition sometimes, so I always felt guilty about that. But seeing that is actually something that falls within this category that a lot of people have, that's not necessarily bad or good. It's just the way things are, was encouraging to me, if that makes sense. So kind of going through the thought of, which categories or which of these relate to you, which of these do you think other people you interact with have, is a good way to start understanding what they're thinking of. And this all comes with an asterisk, like if you're dealing with a sociopath or someone who's crazy, obviously that is a different category. And do you have that?
Yeah, I sort of had a question actually.
Yeah.
You said, I think you might have suggested that having your amygdala, if that's how you pronounce it, triggered, is that the result of being more insecure as a person? Or would you say that that's one of the primary drivers?
Of being what?
Insecure as a person.
I think...
Or how much of a role does that have to play in this?
I mean, I don't think it has to do necessarily with security or insecurity, because I can get triggered by very like benign comments, thinking about roommates or things like that. But now I'm thinking about it, does that make me insecure? Maybe if they're talking about something that you are insecure about, that will trigger your amygdala. Or if you feel triggered, you're like, why am I getting so mad when this was a very benign comment? It might be highlighting your own insecurities you didn't even know you have, actually. But generally, like, are people more secure or less secure? I think that's hard to broadly evaluate.
Right.
But in certain contexts, it might illuminate you to, okay, why did I freak out like this? You know, why are my palms sweaty and all this? I must really be more sensitive about this than I thought. Which, yeah, this was all one day of just a lot of thinking about yourself, and it was very mentally exhausting, but it was very useful too. Any other thoughts or questions? Yeah, so we kind of went through this exercise of thinking about the needs of who we talk with versus our own needs, and then went into how in a workplace or otherwise we can work on giving feedback to enhance relationships. And this kind of goes back to if you're thinking of kind of confronting somebody or approaching somebody and you don't want to trigger them, but you can tell they are, or if you're triggered yourself, these are general ways kind of to get that cortisol level down a little bit more quickly that we kind of already talked about. But if you're going to bring something up in terms of feedback, stating your intentions right off the bat to make sure you're not being misunderstood might be obvious, but it doesn't always happen, especially when this is an informal environment that we all seem to work in. So being clear about your intentions, breathing to stay calm yourself, asking questions or pausing if someone seems to be reacting poorly, but making sure that you don't avoid kind of bad, contentious relationships. And that kind of goes back to bravery and being comfortable with maybe bringing up something to someone that is, a little worrisome. And yeah, think about timing. And then also, this idea of feedback kind of came about because one of the hierarchies of human needs is growth. And so, feedback might not be pleasant for everyone. You just want to go along your way and not really worry about what's happening to other people. But if you want to be a good leader and distinguish yourself from the rest of the pack, being comfortable with giving and getting feedback frequently creates more of a dialogue and helps you grow more quickly. And that itself, growth, is a human need that can be fulfilled that way. And during this part, people had so many questions, and I felt really appreciative of never having to work with difficult people the way some of the people in the workshop did. Everyone was very candid, and there are just, maybe you feel the same way I did where you haven't really had to deal with anything that would warrant this type of feedback, then that means you are very lucky. And I think that's something maybe everyone here can share because we all work at the same department, which is good. But anyways, it's good to just kind of think about feedback, and open communication is another way to be a good leader. Okay, so that kind of wraps up introspection and feelings and all that. If there's any more thoughts, or we can bring it up later if you're still kind of mulling it over. But I'll just touch briefly now on some of the other aspects of the workshop that we also enjoyed. This was honestly a pretty emotional day, but it was constructive. It wasn't just like a complaint fest or something. Yeah, John.
A question that I thought about a lot. You just made a really good point about this department. I think it's a very functional, interpersonally functional place. It has been as long as I've been here. I don't think that's by accident, but I don't know how it's happened either.
Yeah.
So if you take 100 or so people at random from a population that tends to be a little bit more introspective and private, you shouldn't expect that you're going to have a socially outgoing, sort of collaborative and supportive environment necessarily. And so it'd be really interesting to get these experts' opinions on how do organizations end up having that characteristic. Because I don't think it's by accident, but it may not also be a function of dedicated desire to cultivate it either. It just somehow happens. There might be key people who manifest that or make it happen, and it'd be interesting to figure out what they say about that. Did you ever talk about that at this?
We didn't talk about like kind of group dynamics as much,
Yeah.
but what Chris mostly does is work with, like, a company will hire her to work on everybody in the company and how they can arrange themselves and interact more. So I'm sure if we asked her, then she would have a lot to say about what what maybe manifests that.
Yeah.
Because that is interesting, and I don't think it's because, every faculty member has, taken their disc profile and is thinking about things this way. It's something
that's right.
really organic.
Yeah.
That's interesting. And maybe just having a few examples motivates a few more people to be more like that, motivates a few more to be like that.
Right.
Yeah.
And what's the threshold lack of toxicity that kind of inoculates a place against a toxic work environment? That's a really interesting question.
Right, yeah. That's interesting. We didn't talk about that too much, but it would have been interesting too.
Okay, thanks.
For sure, yeah.
Can I
Cool,
ask
okay.
one? Yeah. Along those lines, did they have any discussion about, or any hard data that kind of prescribes, like, the general happiness of the work population as a function of, like, how productive it actually is? Like, are happier places for sure more productive?
No, that would have been interesting. That would have been neat to know. And that kind of what that's making me think of is going back to the disc profiles. Sometimes, like the I category, which I'm most familiar with, they're the people that like inspire you, make you enthusiastic. But the pitfall is that we might not totally get things done or follow through on projects. And it said in my document, you might really like starting projects a lot more than finishing them. And that is so 100% true, it's almost spooky. So, luckily John helped me rein that, but, so that is a question of how happy, are we all just excited, oh my God, but not really doing anything, or not, but then if people are more comfortable and they're not freaking out, they're not triggered all the time, you would also anticipate them to be more productive in that case too.
I wonder which more extreme is more detrimental to actual productivity. Like being so happy that you're constantly like BSing all day and not getting anything done, or just being unhappy in front of your computer all day and just like, oh God, I can't stand being here right now, type of thing.
Yeah, I bet there's an inflection point on that curve. I think it's a more parabola. I bet that's right.
Right. And I think emphasizing the group dynamics, Chris likes having someone from each category in their group, because then you can have someone who gets everyone pumped up, motivated, someone who's getting it done, someone who's getting it right. That's the conscientious group that a lot of people belong to. Working closely with, okay, they're motivated, now they're going to go do something that's actually accurate. And then the steady people are noticing everybody else and how they're all doing and supporting them in whichever way they feel needed. Yeah, and Chris said whenever she's in a meeting, afterwards she'll go to like her steady S person and be like, so what just happened there? Because they're the people that are picking up on all these nuances by being observant and being people-oriented and observant that make things. So yeah, I think balance is always the answer. It's maybe a lazy one, but I think it is true that balance is best. Okay, we can pick that up later if people have more thoughts. But moving on to the next day, we had the American Association of University Women come, and there were a few panelists there that went over negotiating salary, which was something I had never gone through before, never have gone through negotiating salary. So this was very useful to me. And we started up kind of on a depressing tone, more thinking about women in particular and this gender gap. We all know it's there, we all know it's real. It gets, if you divide it up by race, it gets worse for most minorities except Asians. And one thing that came out as we were discussing this is that women tend to, I'll just put my next bullet point up, they tend to negotiate less overall, and younger women in particular only negotiate like 25% of the time. But for younger men too, the ratio of people that negotiate is also lower than people who are mid-career, late career. But there's always about this 15% difference between how many men versus how many women negotiate. And what that ends up leading to, that I didn't know before, this is just a highlight, is that people, and this was showing up again and again with people who are more mid-career in the workshop, is that they started at such a lower salary because they didn't negotiate, that now when they go to ask for raises, being 20 years into their career or something, the answer that they got was, well, you started out at such a low salary, we can't give you that raise because it would be 20%, you know, it'd be 20%. Our policies, we only give you 5% raises per year. And so, you know, people down the line, they had this cumulative amount of money that women were losing out on, and it was hundreds of thousands of dollars of your own savings that accumulates because you didn't start negotiations right off the bat. And so that was kind of what we went through, is practicing that a little bit. And we did an exercise where we had to like pretend to be a boss and someone who's getting hired, and I was terrible at it. You know, I only countered with one of my salary, you know, bumps or something, and then didn't try it again. I just thought, okay, that's it. You know, I want this job that I don't even know what it is, but I want it. And so my feedback from the boss was, you know, I actually was, you know, I was kind of lowballing you. You can ask again. You can ask for the amount you want 2 or 3 times that is expected in the negotiation process. So this kind of longevity in the gender gap based on what initially you do when you enter the workforce was something I wasn't aware of before. Yeah.
Another way to counteract the fact that raises aren't a very good way to increase your pay is to change jobs or change where you're working. Is there any study on the differences between men and women doing that strategy to increase pay as opposed to negotiating raises?
Yeah, that's a good point, and that did come up with what flexibility you have to get paid, and that is a way to sometimes get around it, I believe. I'm trying to think. I mean, a lot of the women there were kind of working in National Weather Service or kind of very structured lab type settings where the mobility wasn't there. And so those were the people who kind of got stuck. But yeah, definitely leveraging into a different job where the base pays this would be a way to get around it. And this is definitely not the only reason there's a gender gap. There's a million reasons. You know, women typically do undervalued work like teaching and you know, social work, things like that. There's a lot of reasons, but this was one I wasn't really aware of before, which is why I'm highlighting it. And it was kind of unfortunate. This association was great and gave us a lot of pointers. Negotiate benefits. If you can't negotiate salary, that was one thing. But they really are geared towards people going into the private sector, which is a totally different type environment than what most of the people at the workshop were in. So there were a lot of kind of caveats there. But if you're interested in entering the private sector, they gave us this whole workbook I'm happy to share with more tips and little exercises you can do to try and negotiate more effectively. But it seemed like there was a disconnect between how this works in like a government lab or government or federal position versus private sector where it's a lot more fluid. Any questions on negotiating salary? That's just a brief little highlight.
No, I would just add a piece of advice from my own experience. It's wise, man or woman, if you're in an academic setting, don't forget, if you get to the end of the line in the interview process, they want you. They don't want a person like you. They want you.
Right.
So you have that leverage. You can go crazy with it. You can say, I want twice the normal average salary. They're going to say, forget it. We can't do that. But if you're somewhere and you've done your homework, you can definitely go above the level that they suggest to you. I did not do that. I was in that mode of, I really want this job. I'm going to take whatever's thrown at me. I don't have any regrets looking back. However, that was a lesson I did learn. Never could employ it, but I learned it.
Yeah.
So I'm giving it to you.
Yeah, that's a good one. And we did go through, you can use salary.com to look at what the median salary in a certain position is. It's even easier for us because everything's public, really, so you can just straight up look. But their recommendation was look at the median salary and then maybe make like your resistant point, the lowest thing you're going to accept, maybe right at the median salary, and then ask for something that's above that median threshold. Always go above, always.
Exactly right.
Yeah, and there were examples. One of the women there, she helped her daughter negotiate. She got like a $9,000 increase in her salary by going through some of the practices that we went through. So, good proof. Proof is in the pudding. And again, maybe I was very uncomfortable saying that, going for that second ask. I didn't do it, but getting over that is another way to build that courageousness that leaders have. Okay, almost done here. We also had a career panel of all of these lovely folks. And so just a few quotes that I ended up writing down. This top one especially was kind of the theme of the whole workshop. There's no learning in the comfort zone, and there is no comfort in the learning zone. I think I said that right, and that is absolutely true. And the struggle is always worth it, right? You always get to that certain point where, you finish that homework set, or you really grasp that concept, or you get the raise where you just get triggered in like a happy way. So it's worth it. This one I really like. You can do it all, but not all at once. So there is an emphasis on pacing yourself, trying to give yourself breaks when you feel like you need them, otherwise you're going to burn out. But be optimistic that everything that you can be done is possible. You just gotta prioritize a little bit. Kevin got really kind of emotional when he brought up this third point about not waiting to separate work-life balance. I think this is really important in grad school. Okay, fine, you might have a few crazy weeks or even a few crazy months, but try as best as you can. Don't think I'll sleep when I defend my PhD or something. I had that thinking for a very long time, and it only made my bad habits worse and worse and worse until I started trying to balance those more. And then also, when you're ready to just jump in, again, maybe you're freaking out, you're like, I'm in this new job, or I'm gonna be teaching this, I have no idea what I'm doing. Be okay with that discomfort and just go for it anyways. Maybe even fake it till you make it. So this was a really great panel and some good things. We wrapped up the workshop with a session on active listening, which was very, very illuminating. And we started out with an exercise where we had partners and you had to just talk, one person had to talk just about whatever they felt like it, and the other person had to listen but could not respond. You had to mark every time that you smiled or nodded or raised your eyebrows or something to try and limit, like, okay, and it was very uncomfortable, right? That's not the way we listen. Listening is a two-way process, and that was kind of the exercise there. And everyone was very uncomfortable because when you're not getting feedback from the person you're talking to, everyone just started kind of freaking out and getting slightly triggered. Versus when you're allowed to respond and nod and smile and all that. So anyways, we kind of went through these three levels of listening. Subjective listening, a term I've never heard of before, is when you're listening to someone else but you're filtering what they're saying through your own experiences. So this is like if someone said, I went to the beach last weekend and it was great, and your first reaction is, oh my god, I've been to that same beach, and then you launch into your own story and you're just like, yeah, okay, that's not why I was bringing it up, but thanks for cutting me off. So this is something I think a lot of people do because you want to connect, but it's actually, we can listen better. And so in contrast to subjective listening, which maybe isn't always bad, having some way of relating is okay, but try and limit your own response to when the other person's finished with their story. Objective listening is basically just literally, processing whatever that person's saying, not much reading into what they're saying though. In contrast to this intuitive listening, where I think we all should try to, invoke more, maybe go from level 1 to level 3 is what I'm trying to work on now, is when you're using all of your senses to see, okay, what is that person saying, and then try and unpack a little bit more. What are they really getting at here? What are they really trying to show you with this? Are they telling you a story about skydiving because they want you to know that they're brave? Are they excited? Kind of unpacking their beliefs and hopes and all that. And so I had no idea what to expect. I thought this might be super boring, and it was actually really illuminating, like hour and a half or so we spent with this person kind of thinking about this. And then there's also, he gave us levels 0 and levels -1, which is basically distracted listening, and then squirrel listening, which is when someone on their phone is just trying to do whatever to find something more interesting than whatever you're saying. Everyone can tell when the person they're talking with is in one of these categories, I think. But I liked the differentiation between subjective and intuitive. And I've been trying, and I solicited advice from other people in the workshop. Only one person got back to me, but she said the same thing, where she's trying to eliminate or reduce her subjective listening and really get more to the intuitive listening, which is hard because you start, you think about something of your own experience and you think that's good, and it is good because you can relate, but then you start thinking about your own response. You're not really listening to why that person's talking to you then. So this was just another last little thing that we did. So I think the main takeaway messages would be that being a good leader is not always easy, but it is possible, regardless of where you fall into that DISC profile spectrum. It doesn't matter, you can definitely use skills to become a better leader. You know, it's not just the loudest people that are always leading the way. That doesn't have to be the case. Using your emotions to fuel action in a meaningful way, once your amygdala is calmed down, it can be very, very positive. I think a lot of times in science, and this was some people, you know, they're like, oh my God, I don't have emotions. Trying to suppress them is not productive. Trying to unpack them and not respond right away, but still figure out why am I feeling that emotion is something that leaders can benefit from a lot. And then remember that, you know, people generally are not out to get you. They are thinking about their own needs and their own priorities. So trying to think about the other side. I'm not saying this is easy. This is something that comes up too, I think, with like communicating climate change or things like that. Where I remember once in a class, I'm like, do I have to be a psychologist to be a climate scientist and to convince people? But you know, if you want to take this next step to leading, to impacting people more effectively, then yeah, you're just gonna have to suck it up and think a little bit harder and do a little bit more. And that's not impossible, right? This workshop really helped me come up with tools to try and do that. So with that, I'll conclude. Thank you all for your attention and discussion. We can continue it. And also I want to acknowledge the people who arranged the workshop and the sponsors again for making it so fun. Thanks. Andrew,
Is there a
John?
workshop outside of your Science Women's Network that might host something like this?
I don't know about others. I'm sure there are leadership workshops. I would be shocked if there weren't any offered on campus, maybe something campus-wide. I almost think I don't want to say it, like the Wharf, I've maybe seen some leadership. I'm not totally sure.
Yeah, there is such a program.
Okay, yeah.
Seems to me it might be more executive leadership, so it would kind of disqualify, I think, graduate students, which is a mistake. Because I think this is a really good point. So anyway, that's all I know about that.
Yeah, and Ankur did, he ended up going somewhere, I can't remember what it was for, something with one of his, vast array of things, that also had Chris come and visit, and he knew all about the disc profile. So you could ask him, or I was almost thinking it'd be cool if we could try and get like a department-wide pool of how many, if you buy all these profile assessments in bulk, 20 packets of 25, they're pretty discounted. So, I mean, I don't know if that's of interest to the department, but I think it'd be illuminating. It was definitely illuminating for me to find mine. So, someone on campus should know. But yeah, that was one of the things they asked in our survey was how important was it that it was all women versus not women. And I mean, to me, all of these seem broadly applicable to both. So. Maybe a broader Earth Science Network one would be cool in the future. I don't think anything would inhibit that. Yeah.
It's kind of similar, but do they, or the Earth Science Women's Network, are they going to do this more than just the annual event?
Yes. So they are. I think they're in the process of applying for funds to do this more frequently. I think I only saw they did one in 2013 and then this one, but I'm not positive. Tracy would probably know, or any of these people as well. Like Meredith Hastings is another founder, and I think Christine too. And they do, if you're going to AGU by chance, the ESWN has a whole bunch of kind of day-long or half-day-long events as well you can check out if you're going. Yeah, they're trying to do it more frequently based on funding. Yeah, John.
I notice there's not a word in any things you said about the myth of multitasking, which is interesting. Because you're dealing with all the fundamental blocks against its efficacy, listening well, dealing with other people well. You can't. I don't think you can multitask. I think we should stop telling ourselves that you can, number one. So I'm kind of encouraged to see that there's not much discussion of that, which is really good.
Right.
And then I'll say something that's kind of heretical. That was just an opinion. This might be heretical. I think that the Earth Science Women's Network should encourage the participation of young male scholars in this exact sort of thing. Because half a generation or a generation from now, it's those men and those women in the room who are going to be deciding who's the leader of organizations, institutions, and whatever. They should all know what these things are all about. Because I think you're right. These apply to everybody. And it might be, in some ways, a little more comfortable right now to have this kind of material discussed amongst women scholars, but it might not be as effective in changing the broad culture for well downstream if these opportunities are not availed to young men as well.
Yeah, I agree. And I think this kind of grew first as a women's network and then evolved into just an earth science network extension, sort of. So I think, and then, they had over 130 or so people apply. There were only 50 spots. So some of it might have just been,
Just too many people.
yeah. And there were some times where, someone has the same education as her husband. They were up for the same job, and they said, this was in the salary negotiation part. They said, well, your husband's making this much, so you don't have to make this much.
Oh,
To save that much. So I mean, this was not like a man hate fest. And I don't think like having men in the room during that type of thing would be bad because.
Yeah.
It's just a fact. That was just something that happened. It wasn't like she was saying, all men are evil or anything.
Yeah.
So if you get those types of comments as much or not, there might be some comfort you're giving up there with talking about things like that, but I don't think that was the broad goal of the workshop, and I don't think it would have impacted things. And I think having everyone in the room would overall put everyone on a more level playing field.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true that, I wouldn't have known that such a story even existed until you just told me that, because it's so horrifyingly inequitable to me as a first reaction.
Yeah.
So it's good that everybody knows those things.
Yeah, right, exactly. So I think maybe that's something we can talk to Tracy about pushing. She didn't seem too involved in this, but I'm sure she, knows more. I'm sure they've thought about this a lot and are going to continue with, given the success of this workshop. So
Sounds good.
yeah. Well, any other thoughts, questions? If you want any of these slides or want to see any of the workbooks I got, I'm happy to share them all. Otherwise, yeah, we can break for now. Thank you.
Thanks very much.